Welcome back to Harmonize Your Life Conversations on Self-Care for Women of Color podcast with your host, Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. I'm so glad to have you back with us for another intriguing podcast conversation. We have been in discussions all month long in the month of April on the subject of self-care, self-grace, and today we're going to add to that conversation extend the conversation to include self forgiveness. So today we're going to be talking about self grace and self forgiveness with our guest, Dr. Jasmine Hardy, who will be our dialogue partner on today. We want you to just get yourself together, get your notebook, get your pen, get your paper. Um, Make sure you share this podcast conversation with someone else that you know needs to hear what we're going to be discussing on today. Okay, so we'll be right back with our podcast guests and this intriguing conversation right after this. Well, I am so glad to have with me in the podcast studio today Dr. Jasmine F. Hardy. She was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. She is my south side of Chicago sister. She was born to the union of Dr. Lavelle Hardy and Pastor Rexell Hardy Sr. As a pastor's kid or PK and therapist, Dr. Hardy understands both the value of church and therapy. I love that. You can have Jesus and a therapist.
Man.
Her education, training, and even her personal experiences with depression and anxiety have equipped her with the empathy and skill set needed to help family, friends, and clients. In 2012, Dr. Hardy obtained her Bachelor of Arts degree in criminal justice from the illustrious Florida A&M University. In 2017, Dr. Hardy earned her Master of Arts degree in forensic psychology, followed by her doctorate in clinical forensic psychology in 2018 from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Post graduation, Dr. Hardy completed her postdoctoral internship at the Illinois Department of Human Services Treatment and Detention Center, where she provided treatment and conducted psychological evaluations to adult male sex offenders. Dr. Hardy is also a licensed associate sex offender treatment provider in the state of Illinois. Throughout her matriculation through undergrad and graduate school, Dr. Hardy has provided psychoeducation, mentoring services, and therapeutic services to at risk youth, adult males involved in the criminal justice system, and many other individuals living with mental health concerns. Currently, Dr. Hardy works as a staff psychologist for the Department of Justice, and one of her passions involves reducing the recidivism rate by working with adult males who are either currently incarcerated or have been incarcerated in the past. Dr. Hardy enjoys providing these individuals with the tools necessary to be successful in their homes, workplace, and communities. Additionally, she is an adjunct professor at her alma mater, the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and through her work as a psychologist and professor, Dr. Hardy strives to decrease the stigma related to mental health within the Black community, and while also helping people to become the best version of themselves. Welcome to the Harmonize Your Life podcast, Dr. Jasmine.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm glad, so glad to have you. So, as I was sharing in my introductory comments, um, before I brought you back into the studio,
Mm-hmm.
um, we've been talking about this idea of self care,
Mm-hmm.
self grace, and self forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the field that you work in,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with male sex offenders and people who have been incarcerated or are incarcerated and have been in the past, I'm sure you see this playing out in a myriad of ways
Mm-hmm.
in the work, in your field of study, and
Absolutely.
in your profession in work.
Absolutely.
So this talk to us about what motivated you to go into this work. what,
Mm-hmm.
what motivated you?
So funny enough, when I was moving a few years ago out of Chicago, I found a diary from when I was like in the sixth or seventh grade. And in there, I wrote that I wanted to be a psychiatrist. Spelled it wrong, but I put in there that I wanted to be a psychiatrist. So at least age 12, I knew that this was what I wanted to do. I didn't fully understand what this role meant, what this job entailed. I grew up, seeing my mother, my parents, my grandparents, just always helping. Being in the church, they were always just a support system for people.
Right.
Um, and so I wanted to do that. It was more so like I just want to be like them. Um,
Hmm.
and then I don't know, just kind of naturally people would come, even as a kid, people would just come and have questions, and I just liked to help. If I felt like I had something, if I knew something, um, at that age, and even throughout high school, I thought that being a therapist, being a psychologist was more about like giving advice and talking. And I was
Okay.
like, I like doing that, so I can get paid for that. Sure, why not? But it's not that really. It's first of all, you listen, or at least you should be
Yeah. Hmm.
much more than you talk, right? Um, and
90, but I tell coaches, because I train coaches,
mm-hmm,
certified professional coach and trainer, I tell them that the majority of our job is not to talk, but
mm-hmm,
it is to listen. And
absolutely,
actually give people the gift of listening,
yep,
because there are a lot of people who just don't have anyone to listen to them.
yep, that's it. And
Hmm.
it goes so far. Just to be in a room with someone who knows that they're being heard, understood, that their experiences are being validated. It goes so much further than just sitting there telling people what to do next.
Hmm.
Um, and then in our work, really, it's not about giving advice. A lot of times, you're just kind of guiding people
Hmm.
to where they want to be or where they need to be. So, um, growing up, it just came from just kind of being around that, knowing and seeing my parents and my grandparents counsel people. Um, my mother was a teacher, she was a social worker, so I just kind of grew up around that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I wanted to work with at risk youth, I wanted to work with kids and teenagers. Um, and throughout grad school, I kept, when it would be time for like internships, I would put in, I would apply to work with children, and I would not get accepted ever. I had all this experience with kids, and I would never. Um, One of the very first papers that I wrote in grad school was how I did not want to work with sex offenders. I said, do not ever place me with them. And then I got placed with them. I was like, you all don't listen. I just told you all. But it was God placed me there. I knew it pretty much as soon as I started the work. Um,
Hmm.
I worked well with them, and I thought to myself, this is not a group that most people want to work with, and
Hmm.
understandably so. But these people go back out into the community, and so if I can do anything to help them become better people, and most importantly, not harm anyone else again. Um, and if God has given me the ability to do that, then that's what I want to do. So it went from just working with sex offenders to I work with all inmates now, like no matter what crimes they've committed. So um, that's how I got into it.
Wow. Okay. So when we talk about this idea of
Hmm.
self grace, it's about forgiving ourselves,
Hmm.
from past mistakes
Mm-hmm.
and helping us to and about moving forward, right? So, how do you define self grace?
Um, so as a Christian, right,
Mm-hmm.
we know that God extends grace to us every morning, right? And I think that it's a lot easier for us to accept that God may extend grace or that we can extend grace to others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we kind of know what that looks like. We kind of know what it feels like, but for whatever reason, to give it to ourselves is much more difficult.
And
Um,
why do you think that is?
so I think that a lot of us, we think a couple things. A lot of us, we think very black and white, right? So when I started working with sex offenders, we would talk a lot about cognitive distortions, right?
Okay.
So what are some thinking patterns that you had that were maladaptive that contributed to your offending? And one of those cognitive distortions is black and white thinking. Um, and so that's it's either this or that. There's nothing in between, right? So you're either right or you're wrong. You're good or you're bad, whatever the case may be.
Okay.
I
So right
remember,
thinking.
yeah,
Mhm.
and there's no gray area, but life is a lot of gray.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gray, and like there's more gray than anything, right? And so I have my own therapist, and I remember talking to her. I was going through some stuff. Um, when I started seeing her, I was dealing with depression and anxiety and all of that. And she told me, she was like, "What cognitive distortions do you have?" I said, "Oh, honey, I don't have any." I said, "The people I work with, they got." She said, "No, you have some." She said, "We all do. It's not a sex offender thing. It's not a crime. We all have them. We all utilize them and so on." So I thought about it, and I said, I know I have some black and white thinking. Um, and what happens with that is, if we make a decision, whether we want it to or not, sometimes it's a mistake, sometimes it's something that we didn't necessarily mean to do, but a lot of times it's a conscious decision that we've made that
Mhm.
we realize later on has these repercussions or
Mhm.
consequences
Mhm. Mhm.
that maybe we were aware of and didn't think would happen or
Mhm.
didn't care at the time or whatever the case may be. And I think with black and white thinking, sometimes we think that if we forgive ourselves, if we give ourselves grace, that must mean that we no longer feel bad about what happened or
Oh.
that we're okay with what happened, right? Or that we would do that thing again, right? And
So I have
those,
to stay on the hook so that I
right,
can be good. So
right,
let myself, if I tell myself you're a good person, you just
right,
made a bad decision,
right, right. And
then
we get caught up on that. And
okay.
it's a way to kind of it's a way to protect ourselves, I think, from, what other people may think about us or how they may judge us if we get to that
Mhm.
place of
Mhm.
forgiveness.
Mhm.
I used to run a group called Shame and Resilience, and it was probably to this day one of my favorite groups that I've ever ran. And we talk about the difference between guilt and shame. And, guilt says, I did a bad thing, right? If
Mhm.
I believe that I did a bad thing, I can correct that. I can make different decisions going forward.
Mhm.
Shame says, I am a bad person,
Oh,
right? So if that's who I am at my core, if I am just a genuinely bad, there is no getting better because this is who I am, right? And so we used to tell our clients, well, I would tell them, I'm like, I want you to feel guilty, but that thing that you did, I want you to be able to recognize that that wasn't okay, especially when we're talking about sex offending, right?
mhm.
Um, but to feel shame, that doesn't help you move on. That doesn't help you get better,
Mhm.
because now you're stuck in it.
So it's kind of like, we say sometimes, you've heard it said, I might have done what they said I did, but I'm not who they say I am.
Right,
Just because I made a bad decision or I had a bad moment in
right,
life,
right.
I sometimes we get what I have found, in my own life and in others that I pastor and coach. Sometimes people get stuck in a moment.
Mhm.
So we had a bad season or a bad moment or
Yep.
not so good moment in our lives, and then we're frozen in time
Yep.
and we can't move forward.
Absolutely. And even if you think about it, just outside of ourselves, society works that way, right?
Mm,
I was
mm,
laughing this morning because I asked the coworker, I said, "Hey, how you doing?" It's early. I get to work at 6. Well, 6. So it's early. Sun hasn't even risen. I said, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm here. You know. I said, "Dang, you ain't even gave the day a chance to, or you ask somebody how you doing? It's Monday. And we're already like, okay, I'm at work or I don't want to
it's
be.
Monday, so I'm not gonna have a good day.
I'm gonna have a good, and we or
And
some.
Monday could be your best day of the week if you let it.
I tell people there's a day that I will never forget. Just a few months after I started at my job, and when I first started telling people the story of what happened that day, I used to tell people that was the worst day I ever had. The worst. I mean, it was terrible. And when I started going into detail about the day, I realized that 3/4 of my day was fabulous. And I remember saying that. I work at a prison, so you never know what's going to happen. The craziest things, occur.
Uh-huh.
But I remember that entire morning. I remember the weather being nice. Everybody was acting like they had some sense. Like I got my job done, like which is not and it wasn't until that afternoon when things went downhill, and when they went downhill, they went down fast. Um, But I'm like, that was a moment, I
It
said,
wasn't the whole day.
it wasn't the whole day,
Mm,
but we do
that
that.
is so good. It was a moment. It wasn't the whole
It
day.
wasn't.
And if
It
we
wasn't.
what would happen to us if we internalize that? You know?
Our whole lives would change. Our whole lives would change. I think um, I don't think a lot of people realize how we hurt ourselves by holding on to things.
Mm,
Obviously forgiving others can be difficult, but to not forgive yourself,
mm,
and we think that we're doing ourselves justice by
mm,
doing that. But you're stuck in this moment. There's guys that I worked with there's a guy who I just met. He just came into the prison system maybe 3 months ago. He's never had like a parking ticket, nothing, nothing. Committed his first crime, and really he was around the wrong people, honestly.
okay.
um he didn't set boundaries, and he got caught up in stuff. First time getting arrested, first time, I mean, you could tell he's so green, he barely has any idea what's going on, and got sentenced to 10 years.
Oh my goodness.
10 years. You got people who are repeat offenders and they get 2 years here.
Oh,
You got
oh,
10 years. No parking ticket, no traffic violate, none of that. And your first offense, you get 10 years. And when I was talking to him, you could just see in his eyes, there was nothing there. And he just kept saying, how did I end up here? I was this person. I had my own businesses. I had this, I had that. How did I end up here? He said, I could never forgive myself.
mm.
And I said, okay. I said, well, what's the worst that would happen if you did forgive yourself?
Oh,
Let's just add. Let's put some options out. What's the absolute worst thing that could happen if you extended yourself some grace? And he just kind of, I said, you don't even have to answer. I said, I'm gonna let you sit with that. I said, because I know that was good. I said, I'm gonna let you sit with it.
that was good. That was good, Dr. Jasmine.
I
That
said,
was
just sit with it for us and just think
the
about
worst that can happen if you forgive yourself.
it. Yeah.
That's such a good question.
And it's a thing to really think about, because we don't weigh that out. We don't think, okay, and even what's the best possible outcome?
Mhm,
Um,
mhm, mhm,
what could my tomorrow look like if I extended myself some grace today? You
mm,
know.
mm.
So yeah, people get stuck in those moments, and it's again, I think a lot of times we think we're doing ourselves some justice and we're protecting ourselves, but we really aren't.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm, mm. So you said some of the reasons we can't forgive ourselves is because of this cognitive dissonance
Mm-hmm.
and black and white thinking. Is there any other form of thinking that we should be aware of?
So there's another there's another distortion, and I don't want it to seem like I'm um these aren't like
No,
diagnoses or
no,
anything
no.
like
This
that,
is
right?
just common.
Yeah, but
I
these are just ways that we,
most people think.
yeah, the ways that we think, the ways that we conceptualize
Mhm.
situations, and the way that we see people and we view ourselves. And sometimes it's distorted, right? Um, and the example I used to give to, or I still give to the guys I work with is, imagine you grew up in a home with, those trick mirrors at the carnival, like the little,
Mhm, mhm,
I
mhm,
said, imagine you grew up in a home where those are the only mirrors you had. And so you grew up thinking you was shaped like this, right? And
mhm.
you finally get out, you get older, your parent allows you to go to a friend's house or whatever, and they have a regular mirror, a normal mirror. You're going to look at that and think, this is, y'all got some weird mirror. This is not how I'm shaped. This is not how I look, because that's not what you're used to.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so now you have somebody trying to show you, no, this is what it actually is. This is reality. You aren't going to believe that
mhm.
because all you know is this trick mirror, right?
And when it's interesting though, you said if you grew up with that
Mm-hmm.
mirror, that trick mirror, so that speaks to our families of origin and our
Absolutely.
upbringing and what we were taught, or
Mm-hmm.
what was happening in our circumstances and environment
Yep.
that helped shape our thinking.
Absolutely. And if
Mhm,
we didn't grow up in environments um, where we saw forgiveness, where we learned about it,
mhm.
where we experienced it, where we had a parent to say I'm sorry, or a sibling, or um, just being around that, it's foreign then, right?
And,
Just
and
like
and you know what else I think? I
mm,
think that we sometimes put forgiveness on levels. Like I can forgive certain things, but if you do this,
right,
I can't forgive.
right,
Right? So
right.
we have this line, if you will, that if you cross that line, that's an offense. That's
Yep,
something we
yep,
can't come back from,
yep.
or whatever. And I think we do it with people, but we also do it with ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think again, if we don't know what that feels like and what that looks like, then how do we even engage in it? A few years ago, this was maybe in 2018. Um, Now this has to do with forgiving someone else, but same concept.
Mhm.
Um, there was a friend of mine. We had gone to high school with each other, and he did something that just, it ruined our friendship. It broke the trust, and I was really sad, but it was showing up as anger, right? And I had never really. I'm not an angry person. I'm not somebody who just holds on to stuff typically, but I couldn't let that go because in my mind, just what you said, I know you've done some stuff, but this, like, you can't come back from that. And I
Mhm.
remember being in Bible class one Tuesday and they were talking about forgiveness. And I raised my hand and I asked, I said, what does that look like? I said, I grew up, we hear about it, y'all talk about it all the time in church. I said, but I need, like, I'm kind of I need to see something. I need like an
Mhm.
example. What steps do I take, right? Um, and I said, because I'm not gonna lie, I said there's somebody in my life who I hate. And I remember when I said, everybody was like, I was like, okay, let's not gasp and be dramatic like this. I was like, but that's how I feel. I said, I don't like that. I don't like that feeling. And I
Mhm.
remember the minister said that how you get to forgiveness may look different from the next person. And he said, so really it's about asking God, what do I need to get to that place? And so
Mhm.
he gave an example about how he had an issue with somebody and God told him, um, you have to physically touch that person. You need to hug that person, and
Mhm.
gave him some other instructions. And he was like, and that may not be the thing for you, but
Mhm.
ask him, how do you get to that place? Because you can't really get there on your own. You probably gonna need some help with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did that, and God gave me instructions on what to do, and I did it. And when I did it, it just left immediately,
Mhm.
right? Um, and that was the first time that I was aware of what I was doing, why I was doing it, and what could come from it, and the peace that I felt from it.
Mhm.
And so since then, when I've made decisions, I've done things or not done things, and I just think back to the peace that I experienced when I forgave somebody else, and I'm like, no, I want to experience that for myself, you
So
know.
so I would even the great. I think I would imagine the freedom that we feel when we finally forgive someone else is freeing, but how much more free would it be
Right.
if we turned that inward
Yep.
and forgave ourselves? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of maybe concern and anxiety about what other people would think, right?
Mhm.
I talked to, the inmates about radical acceptance. I
Mhm.
explained that what that means is
Radical acceptance.
radical acceptance.
Okay. Hmm.
And so we are accepting things in totality, right? Whatever it is, that doesn't mean we're okay with it. That doesn't mean we like it. That doesn't mean we're comfortable. That doesn't mean but we're accepting in the sense that it is what it is, right? So when we're talking about this crime that you committed, you did it. We can't go back, right? And
Hmm.
you holding on to um, certain feelings related to that, you stuck. And so you can't say, oh, 10 years, I've been
Hmm.
locked up 10 years, I'm a different person. You aren't, because you're holding on to the that you did 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So radical acceptance says, I accept what this is, right? And then where do I go from there? Right.
Mm.
And so radical acceptance can even be getting to a place where you say, okay, if I get to the point of forgiveness, or when I get there, people may not like it. They may not understand it. They may not be okay with it. They may think, other people may think I need to stay in the dumps.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's okay.
How could you? How could you forgive?
Right. Right. Exactly. And I explain to people when they talk about the sex offenders, right? And they're like, they need to feel shame. They need to feel shame. And I explain, when these guys get out and they move back into your communities, they work places where you frequent, and if they feel shame, they are that much more likely to reoffend,
Mm.
right? So it
Mm.
doesn't do them any good. It makes us feel good by saying, we just want you to feel bad. We want you to be shameful, not forgive yourself. We want you to just believe that you are this terrible person, right?
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't help anybody around them, because it doesn't help them. So you can't expect them to get out and be a better person when you want them to stay stuck in what they
What they
did,
did.
you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
Um, so I don't think people think that far. And so I think that keeps us too from forgiving ourselves, because we know, or we think um, people aren't going to understand. They want me to stay stuck here, right?
Mhm. And,
Um,
and I think sometimes we have found that to be a comfort zone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because then who am I?
Yeah. Mhm. Sometimes we've been in dysfunction so long
Mm-hmm.
that we're really hooked on dysfunction. And so
Absolutely.
when we have an opportunity, somebody presents us a way out or an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to grow, go through, sit with a therapist, prayer,
Yep.
spiritual guidance, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Somebody present us with an opportunity to change
Yep.
or move forward. Sometimes we've been sleeping with this,
Yep.
I'm gonna dance with the devil I know, right?
Absolutely.
So we've been sleeping with this person. We've been walking with this person. We've been eating with this person. We
Yep.
look at this person in the mirror. We have become comfortable with her.
Absolutely. And
So, and
we
to change will be uncomfortable.
yep. And it's honestly, it's a grieving process too, right?
Mm,
People think about um,
talk about that.
so I teach as well, and so I'm just wrapping up one of my classes for the semester. And we talked about how sometimes you may be working with somebody, you may not understand why they're experiencing something, right? Or experiencing a certain emotion. So the
Mhm.
example I gave was, if you're working with somebody who's going through a divorce and they're really depressed and and maybe the relationship was abusive, it was toxic, it was this, it was that, and you would think, why are you sad? Why you should be happy? I said, the person is still grieving a loss, right? I said 9 times out of 10, it wasn't always bad, right? It served some purpose. So even us um feeling anxious, being depressed, being in this
Mhm.
dysfunctional environments and relationships with others and ourselves, it served a purpose at
Mhm.
some point,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
so now we separate from that, and we're grieving the loss of this thing that we once considered a protective factor,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
also realizing a lot of things we're taught, a lot of things we do are learned behaviors. And if you have somebody say that this thing that you're doing is it's unhealthy, it's maladaptive, you're not just telling that person that what they're doing is wrong. What they may hear is my mother did it wrong, my father did it wrong, right?
Oh,
Everybody,
okay.
you saying everybody did it wrong.
Ah,
You saying what my
don't talk
grandmother
about my mama.
don't talk about right.
Don't
It
talk.
ain't just me. You said everybody in my house, everybody in the Hardy household, we all got it wrong, right? Which is why you'll hear when we talk about corporal punishment, right? Which a lot of times may be abuse in some households, right? And you'll hear people, well, I did this or my parents did it and I turned out okay. And I love when the people that I work with say it, and I'm like, but you locked up, you know. And your way of dealing with things is to assault people. That's your immediate reaction,
Okay.
right? Where
Okay.
did we learn this from? But we have to be careful because again, they're not just hearing, oh, I have something to change. You saying that what I know, what my family has taught me, the people that I
And
revere,
I love.
that
Mhm,
I love,
mhm,
right? And
mhm,
that I respect that they got it wrong,
mhm.
right?
Wow.
Um, and then sometimes it boils down to people just not believing that they are deserving of grace and forgiveness.
Mhm,
You know, because of what I've done, I'm
mhm,
not deserving of healthy relationships. I'm not deserving of the
mhm,
good that eventually comes with forgiveness,
mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm,
Because when you forgive yourself, when you extend yourself grace, you open up a window, a door,
mhm,
these good things to come in,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
So if you don't believe that you're deserving of that, um, then why would I forgive myself? I'd rather just stay here, you know,
And hold myself hostage.
hold myself hostage.
Mm, mm,
And it's harder to, it's just the longer you stay in it is that much more difficult um to get out of it. I was talking to a cousin the other day, and her mom hasn't really been out the house since COVID started
mm,
3 years ago.
mm,
And I told her, so she said, I'm working with her just, you know, to go to a park,
mm.
something out in the open where, you don't have to be around. And I told her, I said, the longer she does that, the more difficult it would be for her to.
A friend the same way. I
Absolutely.
know one. She has barricaded herself in her house,
Yeah.
and and recently she was hospitalized
Mm.
because of some mental issues. But
Mhm.
the isolation
Yep.
is just
Yeah. It doesn't help
mm-mm,
at all. And it exacerbates whatever was already there or whatever is
mhm,
forming,
mhm. Yeah.
Um, and so it's the same thing personally. When we get into a certain space, the longer we're there, it just becomes that much more difficult
To come out.
to come out of it. And so you got to put in more work now than maybe you would have 10 years ago. Yeah.
So then how do we move forward? How do we begin to practice self-grace and self-forgiveness?
So one, I think the ideal of radical acceptance is so important.
Okay.
Because again, if we go back to that black and white thinking, some people think, okay, if I accept what happened, right? If I'm honest about what happened, that means I'm okay with it. That means I
Mhm,
do it again, whatever the case may be, whatever distortions we kind of come up with, right?
mhm,
Um, and realizing that sometimes gray is good,
mm,
right? Sometimes gray is good. Sometimes gray um, leads us to the peace of mind and the joy that we've been seeking,
mm,
right? And
mm.
so it's just saying that radical acceptance is really just honesty, right? That's really all it is. And
Okay.
it's saying that I did this thing, and even being honest with why you did it,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Being honest, and what was my motive,
yeah,
Yeah.
and being able to say, you know what, I was in a different space then, which is why not only did I do it, but I thought it was okay,
Mm,
right? And I can be honest about, people may not want to hear that, right? But that's my honest truth. And so we have to kind of sit in that, right? And so that's the first thing, being honest about where we were in that space, why we did what we did, um, accepting that we can't change things, but that there is space and opportunity for us to do something different, right? Um, if you're a Christian, obviously God has to be involved in that process, right? If we were able to do it on our own, we would have reached that point a long time ago. And so it's asking for strength, it's asking for peace of mind, it's asking for it's something that I don't think a lot of people realize we have to work on daily, right? Because if I'm having a good day today, if I'm surrounded by good people, I may be okay. But if somebody throws in my face what I did tomorrow, right now, I don't really have the strength to, accept that great. I was good yesterday because I was surrounded by support, but now you've thrown back in my face that thing that I'm trying to forget, right? And so asking God for the strength to practice that and be in that space every day. Right. This is something that I'm just going to constantly work on. And we're not perfect. So the thing is, I might mess up again. I might do something again and it's not intentional. It's not, but
and that's so key, because when I'm coaching women around self-care, health, wellness, fitness, they come into, it's amazing. Sometimes they come into the appointments, they come in confessing like, I didn't do well, I didn't eat well, I didn't, and I fell off, and I said, well, just fall back on.
That's it.
If you fall off,
yep.
I live by the philosophy that when I wake up every morning, every morning, the Bible says, new mercies we receive, right?
Yes.
Great is God's faithfulness to us. But I live by this philosophy. Every day that I'm alive, it's another opportunity.
Absolutely.
To get it right, to grow, to change, to develop myself, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Opportunity for that. And so seize the day.
Yep, absolutely. And I came into work this morning and I asked, we have to go through security, and the officer who works that post right now, he's worked in corrections period for a very long time, pretty much his entire adult life. And so I said, hey, good morning, how you doing? He said, I just hate that I wasted my life away. And I'm like, why are y'all hitting me with this at 7:30 a.m.? I'm like, you ask that, not really thinking people are going to like answer. I just hate that and so he doesn't remember, but he said that to me before. And I remember him saying that he wished he'd done more, even if he stayed at corrections, that now he said, I'm going to retire as just a CO, just a correctional officer, right? I didn't have a position of lead. And I told him, I said, you still above ground. That's what I told him this morning. I said, you're still above ground. I said, you're not dead. I said, so even if you can't do the things that you could have or would have done 20, 15, 10 years ago, you're still here. You're still moving. You still have the activity of your limbs, right? You got your mind. You got a little bit of safety, right? I said, so you can do something. And I said, and if you get caught up on what you could have done, you're going to be stuck right here signing me in every morning, right? Just mad and sad and making my morning depressed, right? I said, but you're still, and he was like, you're right. You're right. I said, yes, I don't want to hear this tomorrow. I said, don't say this again. I said, don't say this again tomorrow morning. He's like, oh, no, Doc. I know. And so sometimes we think it's too late.
Yeah.
Right. It's too late. Too much time has passed. Too much damage has been done. Right. But God doesn't see it that way. Right. God doesn't see it that way. And so why should we, especially if we're believers, right? And I think when I asked that guy before, what's the worst that could happen? That's a real question to ask, and once you realize it ain't so bad, it's not so bad on the other side. That's what I was going to say earlier. One of the other distortions we would talk about was catastrophizing.
Oh, okay.
And especially inmates, they do it all the time. And so I'll write it on a board, and the word has like 16 letters in it, and I'm right, half of them can't pronounce it. What is it? I said catastrophe. I said, that's what you're doing. I said, you're taking something this small and you're blowing it up.
Yeah.
Blowing it up. I said, or you're taking something and just turn it into something that it's not, right? Or believing that it's going to turn into something that it there's nothing that factually states that this is going to happen. So um they'll think, okay, if I and we I talk about them I talk about that with the guys, because they struggle with that. My family isn't talking to me. This person's cut me off because of what I've done. um,
Mhm.
I said, and yet you have support in here. You have other support else. It may not be the support that you want, but you have people that
Mhm.
are like, hey, I don't see you just for what you did, I see you past that, right?
Mhm.
um, and so they think, okay, if I forgive myself, I'm going to lose everybody. And I say, you're probably going to gain more people.
Mhm.
You're going to gain more of a support system and a healthier support system, because people are going to see a different you, somebody who's moving differently.
Yeah, yeah.
But we catastrophize. We think the absolute worst. We come up with the worst outcomes, and most times that's not even the reality. You
Mhm.
know.
Mhm. Yeah. So as relates to self-care,
Mhm.
how does self-grace and self-forgiveness impact
Mhm.
how we as particularly as women
Yep.
do or engage in self-care?
Yeah. So the idea of self-care, we have to go back to, and we have to break down what it means, right? And why are we engaging in it anyway, right? And it's in the name, right? But it's not just about doing something that makes us feel good, or um,
Mhm.
you know we're doing it because we care about ourselves, right?
Mhm.
I think we think of self-care as this thing that we're doing, but
Right,
it's an ideal, right? I
right.
care about myself. I love myself,
Mhm.
right? And I love myself enough to treat myself well,
Mhm.
right? So,
Mhm.
and so it's funny because we'll say, oh, we'll engage in self-care. And we think that it's always something external, right? Something that we're doing, something that's tangible. But if you're saying, I love myself enough to take care of myself and to make sure that I'm well, that includes forgiveness. So self forgiveness and grace, that is self care,
Yeah,
right? They're the same thing. You can't really have one without
without the other.
love,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And so obviously there's things that we have to do, conversations that may need to be had, prayers that need to be said, therapy, whatever the case may be, to help us
Mhm.
get there. But it's this ideal that um,
And
I
I deserve to be free. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to not hold myself hostage to a bad
absolutely,
moment. Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
and it doesn't help anybody for me to be stuck. It
Mm,
it does, and even the individuals who say you don't deserve to experience happiness or whatever, whether you experience happiness or not, it doesn't even affect them. The people who are saying it doesn't even affect them. They going about their day-to-day bits, not having any idea what's, they just want to be at peace to know that you're miserable
yeah,
because of what you, but on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't even affect that person. You're the one who has to live with it,
yeah.
right? um and then of course, if you are a parent, if you're somebody in leadership, um you have to think about, okay, me not being well, how does that affect the people around me
Yeah,
as well,
yeah.
right?
Because self-care is a gift not only to you, but it's a gift
Absolutely.
to everybody else
Absolutely.
around you. Wow. You know what? You are full of information, knowledge, wisdom.
Yeah.
I'm just I gotta have you back on. We gotta do this some
Yes,
more.
ma'am.
We gotta
Yes,
do this
ma'am.
some more because this is really good. I love the way you help reshape our thinking.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Because as a man or woman
Yeah,
thinking
absolutely.
in his heart, so is he. The Bible
Absolutely.
says, and so we got to change our we have thinking,
Yep. Yes.
right? And if
Yep.
we can get that together,
Yep. Yep.
right? Because thoughts become actions,
Yes.
and actions
Yeah.
become habits, and habits become our lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So listen, I want everybody to be able to find you, um, Dr. Jasmine. We are talking to Dr. Jasmine F. Hardy. If you're listening to us or watching us on YouTube, and I hope you are, You are listening to the Harmonize Your Life Conversations on Self-Care for Women of Color podcast. You can find this podcast on Anchor, on Google, on Apple, on Spotify podcast. And you can also find us on YouTube, on my YouTube channel at Dr.Toni G. Alvarado. If you've not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, I want you right now to stop what you are doing and subscribe and share this podcast message. Subscribe first and share the link, share this message. Listen, beloved, these conversations are literally changing lives. I get so many emails and comments from women, sometimes very, very private emails and comments from people sharing with me the things that these podcast conversations are helping them to live through and come out of. And so I want you to do that, because when you subscribe to our YouTube channel, what happens is you allow this podcast to come up in the search engines in Google. When people go and they type in words like self-grace, self-forgiveness, health, wellness, self-care, fitness, mental health, all the things that we talk about, nutrition, recreation, all the things we talk about on this podcast. When they type in those keywords, this podcast will be one. They don't have to look 30 pages down into Google to find us. As the more we get, the more people we have subscribed to this podcast, the easier it will be for people to find us when they're looking for information and looking for encouragement, sometimes even in the middle of the night, because that's when most suicides take place. That's when people are when illness, when you're sick, it's always worse at night. When you have a cold, it's always worse at night. You have a fever, it's always worse at night. And so people are going through their night season, they are looking for information and strategies that will help them come out. And I'm so grateful that Dr. Jasmine is our dialogue partner today to help us with that. So please go to my website at drtonyalvarado.com. You can learn about all the work that we're doing there in this self-care movement. Women, join the Harmonize Your Life Self-Care Network there on my website so that you can be a part of this movement, so that you can take part in all the things that we do. The podcast is only one aspect of this self-care movement, but we host retreats, seminars, we have yoga classes on Monday night. Right now we're in the month of April and we're hosting a deep breathing class on Thursday nights at 8 p.m., just 30 minutes, 8 to 8:30, to help us woosah and just learn how to breathe throughout our day, and how our breathing impacts our brain, how it impacts our whole overall sense of self-care, health, wellness, harmony, and peace. And so you can learn about that and you can be a part of that through the Harmonize Your Life Women's Self-Care Network. Our dialogue partner today, again, is Dr. Jasmine Hardy, Jasmine F. Hardy, and she, you can find her on Facebook. I said, what is this?
It's a nickname from high school. And then Usher's last name. I know.
Okay, I get it. J. Fathead Raymond. Okay.
I really do that because I don't put my inmates confinement.
Right. I got you. I get it. Okay. And then on Instagram, you can follow her at I Love Jazz 1. I Love Jazz, Jazz 1. Okay. And I get that because of the work that she does. She has to protect herself and her identity from those that may want to misuse that. Okay. Right. Okay. So Dr. Jazz, I would like for you to give us one final word of encouragement before we sign off.
Ooh. Be kind to yourself. Extend yourself the grace that you've given others. As long as we are above ground, we should be happy. We should have joy, especially as Christians. God promises us that in the Word, right? And so be kind to yourself, extend yourself grace. know that God loves you, others love you, right? Um, and just be good to yourself.
All right. Be kind to yourself, love yourself, forgive yourself,
Yep,
give yourself the gift of grace.
absolutely.
Don't be guilty of being kinder to others
Yeah,
than you are to your own self. All
yep.
right. All right. Thank you all again for joining us this week on the Harmonize Your Life podcast with your host, Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. We'll be back next week with another episode of this conversation and this podcast. If you'll just stay right there, we'll be right back to dialogue with you. All right. See you soon.